The sun was a bright, white coin in a sky that had no clouds at all. It pressed down on the huge, flat parade ground, making the air shimmer just above the hot, clean concrete. The place was so quiet, you could almost hear the heat. It was a serious kind of quiet, the kind that comes before something important. Standing in perfect, straight lines were hundreds of new sailors. They wore their crisp, white uniforms, every button shining, every hat tilted at the exact same angle. They didn't move. They hardly seemed to breathe. For weeks they had been pushed, tested, and shaped into a single unit. Today was the proof. Today they were no longer just young men and women. They were sailors of their nation's navy. At the front of this sea of white stood the captain. She was a woman who carried authority like it was part of her uniform. Her posture was straight, her eyes were sharp, and her face was calm. She had done this ceremony many times before, but she never let it feel ordinary. To each person graduating, this day was the most important of their life so far. She respected that. Her voice, clear and strong, carried across the quiet field as she welcomed the families. She spoke of duty, honor, and commitment. Her eyes, however, were busy. They were scanning the rows of sailors, checking for a single flaw. They were also secretly searching the crowded bleachers where all the families sat. Proud parents, beaming siblings, cheering friends. They were a colorful, happy blur of faces. Hidden in that blur was a face she knew better than any other. Her son was out there, standing in one of those perfect rows. He was just another sailor in the formation, his own mother's face just another blur in the crowd to him. This was their agreement, their secret. Here, on this field, she was not his mom. She was Captain Vance, the commanding officer. He was Seaman Recruit Daniel, one of her sailors. The pride she felt was a private, fierce warmth in her chest, but she kept it locked away behind her professional eyes. The ceremony moved forward with the click-clock precision of a good watch. It was time for the review. This was the moment where the captain would walk slowly down the lines of sailors, inspecting them up close. It was a tradition, a final test of their bearing. She began her walk. Her steps were slow and measured on the hot concrete. The only sounds were the soft click of her own shoes and the distant cry of a seagull. She looked at the young faces as she passed. She saw the focus, the nervousness, the incredible pride in their eyes. A tiny flicker of a smile might touch her lips for a second when she saw one standing particularly tall, but it was gone just as fast. Her path took her along the edge of the parade ground, not too far from the bottom rows of the bleachers. She could feel the wave of emotion rolling off the families. She could hear a soft sniffle here, a whispered, "That's him." There. She kept her gaze forward, her attention on her sailors. Then something caught her eye. It wasn't a sound or a movement. It was a flash of color, a small burst of blue and black on the ankle of someone sitting in the front row of the bleachers. It was a tattoo. The captain's mind, trained to notice details, didn't just see a tattoo. It recognized it. The pattern was specific, complicated. It was the crest of a ship. Not just any ship, but a famous one. A ship with a hard and heroic history, the USS Resolute. A ship that had sailed through terrible storms, both of weather and of conflict. A ship that was legend in the Navy. Her feet kept moving, one after the other, but her thoughts had suddenly stopped. That tattoo was old. The colors were not bright and fresh. They were faded and soft, blended into the skin by 20, maybe 30 years of life. The woman who wore it was older, too. She sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the young sailors with a look that was more than just pride. It was a deep, knowing kind of WATCHFULNESS. In that single heartbeat of time, as she took another step, the captain understood. This wasn't just a fan of Navy history. This was personal. This was a story sitting in the front row. She felt a pull, a strong and sudden need to acknowledge what she had seen. But she was in the middle of a strict ceremony, with hundreds of people watching. To stop, to break protocol, was unheard of. It could cause confusion. Yet the feeling inside her was stronger than the rule book. Someone who had earned that tattoo, who had lived with it for so long, deserved to be seen. Not as part of a crowd, but as a person. Her next step landed firmly. And then she stopped. The smooth rhythm of the ceremony broke. The officers behind her almost bumped into each other, surprised. A whisper of confusion went through the ranks of sailors. What was wrong? Had someone messed up? All eyes, from the admirals on the stage to the newest recruit, snapped to the captain. She turned, not towards her sailors, but towards the bleachers. Her body was straight, her shoulders square. She lifted her right hand, fingers tight together, and brought it up in a sharp, clean, and perfect salute. It was a salute full of meaning, held not for a second, but for a long, respectful time. She was saluting the woman with the tattoo. The world on the parade deck seemed to freeze. That perfect ticking clock silence was shattered, replaced by a thick, heavy quiet that was full of questions. Everyone held their breath. The captain's arms stayed up, her salute sharp and steady as a stone. Her eyes were locked on the older woman in the bleachers. For a few long seconds, nothing else moved. The sailors in their rows didn't dare twitch. The families in the stands stopped fidgeting. All you could hear was the distant hum of a car and the flapping of a flag. The woman with the tattoo looked surprised, then deeply confused. Her eyes went wide. She glanced behind her, as if the captain must be saluting someone else, someone important, an admiral perhaps. But the bleachers behind her were just filled with ordinary, proud families. The captain's gaze was fixed on her, and only her. Slowly, understanding began to wash over the woman's face. It wasn't a happy understanding. It was the kind that brings up old, deep feelings. Her hand, which had been resting in her lap, slowly came up and pressed flat over her heart. Her chin trembled just a little. She gave the smallest, most respectful nod to the captain, as if to say, "I see you. Thank you." The captain finally lowered her salute. The movement was slow and full of meaning. But she didn't turn back to the sailors. Instead, she turned to face the whole crowd. She walked a few steps toward the stands, her shoes echoing in the quiet. She reached for the microphone on the small podium nearby. The sound of her footsteps was the only sound in the whole world. She stood there for a moment, looking out at all the faces, the young sailors, the families, the other officers. Her own son was somewhere in that sea of white, watching his mother break every rule in the book. She must have known that. But she did it anyway. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began. Her voice was different now. It had lost its formal, commanding edge. It was quieter, warmer, but it still carried to every corner of the field. "You have all come here today to see a new beginning. To see these fine young men and women start their journey." She paused, letting her words hang in the hot air. She then turned her body slightly, just enough to gesture toward the woman in the front row. But a journey doesn't start from nothing. It stands on the foundation of those who came before. It is built on sacrifice. She looked directly at the older woman. "This lady here is the grandmother of one of our graduates today. She came to see her grandson in his proudest moment." The captain's voice softened even more. "But she carries with her a story. The tattoo on her ankle is the crest of the USS Resolute." A low murmur went through the older veterans and officers in the crowd. They knew that name. They knew its history. "The Resolute was a brave ship with a brave crew," the captain continued. 32 years ago, during a very difficult mission, that ship suffered a terrible loss. One of its sailors, a good man, a dedicated petty officer, was lost at sea. He never came home. A complete, utter silence fell again. You could feel the mood change, like a shadow passing over the sun. The captain's eyes were gentle as she looked at the grandmother. That sailor was her son. This lady is a gold star mother. She has lived with that loss every single day for 32 years. The tattoo isn't just ink. It's her memory of him. It's her way of keeping him close. She carries his ship and his spirit with her always. In the stands, the woman's other hand came up to cover her mouth. Tears, which she had been holding back, now rolled freely down her cheeks. She didn't sob. She just cried quiet tears that glittered in the sunlight. The young man sitting next to her, her grandson, put his arm tightly around her shoulders, his own eyes bright with tears. The captain looked back at the rows of new sailors. "When you put on this uniform," she said to them, her voice strong again, "you are not just wearing cloth. You are wearing a legacy. You are connected to every sailor who ever served. You are connected to the families who loved them, and to the families who had to say goodbye. The pride you feel today is shared. The sacrifice your own families make is real. And we must always, always honor those who paid the highest price." She turned once more to the grandmother. "Ma'am," she said, with deep, clear respect, "on behalf of a grateful nation, and from every sailor on this field, we thank you. For your strength, for your son's service, and for being here today to remind us all what this truly means." For a moment, no one knew what to do. Then, from the ranks of the sailors, one young man began to clap. It was slow and respectful. Then another joined, and another. It wasn't wild cheering. It was a deep, thunderous, rolling wave of applause that grew and grew until it filled the entire parade ground. Families stood up. Officers saluted. It was a sound of respect, of thanks, of shared humanity. The captain stood quietly, letting the moment happen. She had done what she felt was right. She had seen a story that needed to be told, and she told it. The strict ceremony was forgotten. For those few minutes, they were all just people connected by love, by loss, and by a deep understanding of what it means to serve. The applause was a living thing. It rolled across the parade ground like a slow, warm wave washing over everyone. The tight, formal feeling was gone. In its place was something heavier, something real. The sound wasn't loud and crazy. It was steady and strong, a shared breath of respect that went on and on. In the front row, the grandmother sat with her grandson's arm around her. Her shoulders shook just a little. The tears kept coming, but the hand over her mouth had dropped to clutch her grandson's hand instead. She wasn't crying from sadness just then. She was crying from a feeling she hadn't expected. For 32 years, her son's memory was hers. It was a quiet, private weight she carried alone. Now, in front of all these strangers, that weight had been seen. It had been acknowledged by a captain, by hundreds of sailors. It was as if a whole nation was saying, "We remember him too." She kept nodding over and over, as if whispering thank you to every single clap. Her grandson, the new sailor, just held her. His own face was wet. He looked from his crying grandmother to the captain, who stood calmly at the podium. He had known about his uncle, of course. He'd grown up with the quiet stories and the photos in a special box. But he had never felt it like this. He had never seen his grandmother's private sorrow become public honor. In that moment, his own crisp white uniform felt different. It felt connected. He wasn't just starting his own story. He was continuing a family one. The pride he felt was suddenly much bigger than just passing training down up in the ranks. The captain's son stood perfectly still, but his mind was racing. He watched his mother, This woman who was always so strict about rules, do the most unexpected thing he had ever seen. He felt a knot in his throat. He was proud, so proud it hurt. But he also understood something new about her. Her duty wasn't just about discipline and orders. It was about seeing people. It was about heart. She had taught him more in those 2 minutes than in all the weeks of training. The captain let the applause continue. She knew this was not a distraction from the ceremony. This was the ceremony now, the real one. After a full minute, she gently raised a hand. Slowly, the clapping died down, fading back into that respectful silence. But the air was still charged. You could still feel it. "Let us return to our graduates," she said, her voice back to its clear, carrying tone, but somehow softer around the edges. "To their achievement, which shines all the brighter against the backdrop of the sacrifices we remember." She stepped away from the podium and back onto the inspection path. The ceremony had to continue. There were speeches to finish, diplomas to hand out, a final march past to perform. But from that moment on, everything felt different. When the captain resumed her walk past the sailors, she saw their faces anew. They weren't just nervous kids anymore. Their eyes were shining with a deeper understanding. They stood taller, if that was even possible. They had seen the true cost of the uniform they now wore, and instead of scaring them, it seemed to give them strength. Later, when it was time for the graduates to receive their certificates, each one walked a little more deliberately. Each handshake with the captain felt more meaningful. When the grandson's name was called, the moment was simple but powerful. He marched up, stopped sharply, and took his certificate from the captain. As their eyes met, he gave the smallest, quickest nod. It wasn't from a sailor to a captain. It was from a grandson, saying thank you for honoring his family. The captain's eyes crinkled at the corners, just for a second, and she gave a tiny, almost invisible nod back. Finally, the last order was given. The formation of new sailors marched off the parade deck in perfect, crisp lines, their families cheering wildly now, the earlier solemnity replaced by celebration. The official part was overgot as soon as the formal dismissal was given. The perfect lines dissolved into a happy chaos. Sailors ran toward their families, their stern faces breaking into huge, relieved grins. There were hugs, laughter, and the clicking of countless cameras. The captain stood to the side, watching the joyful scene with a small, tired smile. She had done her duty. Now she could be a mother. She scanned the crowd, looking for one specific sailor, but before she could find him, she saw the grandmother. The older woman was standing now, surrounded by her own family, her grandson, his parents, others. They were hugging and talking all at once. The grandmother looked a little overwhelmed, but she was smiling through her tears. The captain changed her course. She walked towards them, through the flowing river of happy people. Families moved aside for her, nodding respectfully. As she approached, the grandmother saw her coming. The family quieted. The grandson immediately straightened up, ready to salute his commanding officer again. The captain stopped that with a gentle wave of her hand. "None of that now," she said, her voice quiet and kind. She looked at the grandmother. For a moment, the two women just looked at each other. No ranks, no titles. Just two mothers who understood things most people didn't. "I am so very sorry for your loss," the captain said. It wasn't an official line. It was plain, real, and from the heart. The grandmother reached out and took the captain's hands in her own. Her hands were warm and a little rough. "You saw it," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "All these years? You saw him. You saw my boy." "I saw a sailor who mattered," the captain replied softly. "And I see the mother who kept his memory sailing. Thank you for being here today. You gave all of us a gift." Then, without another word, the captain did something she hadn't planned. She let go of the woman's hands and simply opened her arms. The grandmother stepped into the hug immediately. It wasn't a big, dramatic embrace. It was a close, tight, quiet hug. The captain held her, one hand on her back. The grandmother's head rested on the captain's shoulder for just a few seconds. They stood like that in the middle of the celebrating crowd, two hearts connected by a salute, a tattoo, and a son who was loved and remembered. It was the most important part of the entire day. The hug didn't last a long time, but it lasted long enough. When the captain and the grandmother stepped back from each other, the air around them felt clearer. The older woman wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand and let out a small breath, like someone setting down a heavy bag they'd been carrying for miles. The captain smiled, a real warm smile that reached her eyes. She gave the woman's hand one last gentle squeeze before turning her attention to the grandson. He was standing there, looking a bit unsure of what to do or say, still holding his graduation certificate tightly. "You," the captain said to him, her tone shifting just a bit, back towards the professional, but with a clear layer of pride underneath. "You have a lot to live up to, and I have no doubt you will." He nodded, his voice a little choked up. "Yes, Captain. Thank you, Captain." "Enjoy your family today," she said. "You've earned it." With a final kind look at the whole family, she gave a small, respectful nod and then turned, melting back into the moving crowd. Her job here was done. The grandmother watched her go, then looked at her grandson. She patted his cheek, her wrinkled hand soft against his skin. "She's a good one," she said, her voice rough but sure. "You remember this day. Remember what it means." All around them, the celebration was in full swing. The parade ground was no longer a place of silent discipline. It was a park of joy. Sailors were showing their families around, pointing at barracks, laughing at inside jokes from training. The sound was a happy roar. Across the deck, the captain finally found who she was looking for. Her son. He was standing with a few of his friends, all of them grinning and talking a mile a minute. When he saw his mother walking towards him, his friends immediately stiffened, their smiles fading into looks of serious respect. "At ease, gentlemen," the captain said as she approached. "Congratulations to all of you." They relaxed, just a little, mumbling their thanks. She looked at her son. "A word, sailor?" He excused himself and walked with her a few steps away to a slightly quieter spot near a tall flagpole. The national flag snapped gently in the afternoon breeze above them. For a moment, they just stood there. The captain looked at him, really looked at him, in his uniform. He wasn't her little boy right now. He was a young man who had accomplished something difficult. The professional mask she wore all day finally completely fell away. "Mom," he said, breaking the silence. His eyes were bright. "What you did, that was—" He couldn't find the words. He just shook his head. "It was the right thing," she said simply. She reached out and straightened his collar, a small motherly gesture that had nothing to do with the Navy. "Did you understand it? Why I stopped everything?" He thought for a second. "Because you saw her story, and it was more important than the schedule." She nodded slowly. "That's part of it. But it's more than that. The Navy, any service, it's a family. A big, complicated, sometimes broken family. But a family. We look after our own, and that includes the ones left behind. That grandmother? She's been a part of our family for 32 years, carrying a pain most of us can't imagine. Today, her family and our family came together in you, and in all those other new sailors. I just acknowledged it. I welcomed her back to the fold in front of everyone." She looked out at the laughing, hugging crowds. "All this joy you see," she said, her voice dropping, "it's precious because it's fragile. It exists because people like that grandmother's son were willing to protect it. We can never forget the cost, not for a second. He listened, taking it in. He'd heard speeches about sacrifice before, but this was different. This wasn't a speech. It was a lesson from his mother, shown with a salute and a hug. "I won't forget," he said. And he knew he meant it. "Good," she said. Then her face softened completely. "Now, come here." She opened her arms. He didn't hesitate. He stepped into his mother's hug, just as the grandmother had. He hugged her tight, the crisp white fabric of his uniform pressing against her formal jacket. She held him just as tight, closing her eyes for a second. All the pride, all the worry, all the love of a mother for her child was in that embrace. "I am so proud of you, son," she whispered into his ear. "So incredibly proud." When they pulled apart, both of their eyes were a little wet. They laughed a little at themselves, a soft, private sound lost in the crowd's noise. "Go," she said, shooing him playfully. "Go be with your friends. Celebrate. You have liberty for the weekend. Your dad is waiting at the gate with the car." He grinned, the young sailor again, full of excitement for the freedom ahead. He gave her one more quick, awkward salute, a son to his mom, who also happened to be a captain, then turned and ran back to his waiting friends. His shoes pounding on the hot concrete dot, the captain watched him go, her heart full. She took a deep breath, smelling the ocean air mixed with the smell of cut grass. The ceremony was over. The unexpected moment of honor had passed. Her son was launched into his new life. She began to walk slowly towards the administration building, ready to change out of her uniform and just be a person again. As she walked, she passed little clusters of families. She heard snippets of conversation. "That was so moving. Never seen anything like it. My grandfather served." She smiled to herself. The story of the tattoo and the salute was already weaving itself into the day's memories. It wasn't about her. It was about connection. It was about reminding everyone that behind every uniform and behind every family in the stands, there was a human story, often filled with both joy and tremendous sacrifice. Her own story for the day was nearly done. But as she walked, she felt a deep sense of quiet satisfaction. The rules had been bent, but the Navy's heart had been shown. A long-carried pain had been gently seen and honored, and her son had learned the most important lesson of all on his graduation day, that true strength is a combination of discipline and of a compassion that is brave enough to break the routine. The captain's footsteps were slower now as she walked away from the parade ground. The loud joy of the families began to fade behind her, replaced by the quieter sounds of the base going about its normal day. A truck rumbled in the distance. Somewhere, a drill instructor's faint voice called out a cadence. The flag rope tapped softly against the metal pole. She walked into the shaded coolness of the administration building. The hallway was quiet, her own steps echoing on the polished floor. Here, she was still the captain. Officers and clerks nodded respectfully as she passed. "Congratulations on the ceremony, ma'am," one young officer said. She thanked him with a small smile, but her mind was elsewhere. She reached her office and closed the door behind her. For the first time since sunrise, she was truly alone. The silence was a physical thing, after the emotion of the day. She stood for a moment, looking out the window at the empty parade deck. It looked different now. It wasn't just a piece of concrete. It was a place where a hidden story had come to light. She took off her formal hat and set it carefully on the desk. Then she unbuttoned her stiff service jacket and hung it on the back of her chair. In her simple uniform shirt, she felt lighter. She sat down, not behind the desk, but in the small, worn armchair in the corner where she would sometimes drink her coffee. She let out a long, slow breath. Her eyes fell on a framed photo on her bookshelf. It was a picture of her own family, taken years ago. Her son was just a boy in it, grinning with a missing tooth, held tightly by his father. She herself was in uniform, smiling. A lifetime of service, captured in one happy moment. Today, she thought, that boy had become a sailor. And she, as a captain, had done something she would remember forever. It wasn't the salute she was thinking about most. It was the grandmother's face, the shock, then the understanding, then the flood of release. The captain had seen many things in her career, but that raw, grateful look in the woman's eyes was something rare. It was the look of a burden shared, after decades of carrying it alone. A soft knock on the door broke her thoughts. "Come in," she said. It was her senior enlisted advisor, a man who had served for decades. His face was kind and lined with experience. He held 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this, Captain," he said, handing her one. "Thank you," she said, taking the warm cup gratefully. "I do." He leaned against the doorframe. "That was something special out there today. The troops are talking about it. All the right reasons." She sipped the coffee, feeling its warmth. "It just felt necessary," she said simply. "The old Navy would say you broke protocol," he said, a faint smile on his lips. "The old Navy would be wrong," she replied, meeting his eyes. "The heart of the protocol is respect. Sometimes the rule book doesn't have a page for the moment you're in. You have to write it yourself." He nodded, understanding completely. "Well, you wrote a good page today, ma'am." A lot of young sailors learned what honor really looks like, and a lot of families felt seen. He finished his coffee. "I let you get changed. Your family's waiting." When he left, she finished her coffee and stood up. It was time to go home. She changed into her civilian clothes, a simple pair of pants and a soft shirt. Looking in the small mirror, she saw a tired woman, a mother, her hair now freed from its tight bun. The captain was officially off duty. She walked out of the building and towards the main gate. The sun was lower in the sky now, casting long golden shadows. Near the gate, she saw the grandmother's family one last time. They were piling into a big old car, stuffed with balloons and flowers. The grandson, still in his uniform, was helping his grandmother into the passenger seat with great care. He closed the door gently for her. As he walked around to the driver's side, he looked up and saw the captain watching. He stopped. He didn't salute. He just stood straight, placed his hand over his heart, and gave a single solemn nod. It was a gesture of deep, personal thanks, from one heart to another. The captain returned the nod, her hand also coming to rest over her own heart. No words were needed. Then the young sailor got in the car, and they drove off. Turning out of the gate and into the world, the captain watched them go until the car disappeared. She felt a profound sense of peace. The circle was complete. A son lost, a grandson raised, a new sailor forged. The legacy continued. She finally spotted her own car, parked just outside the gate. Her husband was leaning against it, his face breaking into a wide smile when he saw her. She walked through the gate, no longer Captain Vance, but just his wife, their son's mother. He opened his arms, and she walked right into them, resting her head on his shoulder. He held her close. "Heard you caused quite a stir," he murmured into her hair. "Just a small one," she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. He pulled back and looked at her, his eyes full of love and pride. "I'm so proud of you." And of him. He looked past her, expecting to see their son. "Where is the new sailor?" She laughed. "He's with his friends. They have a few hours of liberty. He'll meet us for dinner." As they drove away from the base, the strict lines of the military world gave way to the messy, colorful streets of the town. She looked out the window, watching people live their ordinary lives, shopping, walking dogs. Heading home from work, she thought about the grandmother, probably driving home to a quiet house, but with a heart that might feel just a little lighter. She thought about her own son, laughing with his friends. The weight of his training finally lifted, but a new, deeper understanding planted inside him. The ceremony was over. The story of the tattoo and the salute would be told and retold, maybe becoming a legend on that base. But for her, the true meaning was quiet and personal. It was about the unbroken chain of service and love. It was about seeing the individual in the crowd. It was about the courage to honor a feeling, even when it meant stepping out of line. She reached over and took her husband's hand, lacing her fingers with his. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It had been a long, hard, beautiful day. A day of endings and beginnings. A day where a simple tattoo had reminded everyone that behind every symbol of duty there is a human heartbeat. And that, she knew, was the truest thing of all.